Al Capone, the most famous gangster in history, a drug smuggler. He kills mercilessly and trades in all kinds of contraband, while also donating his money to charity. His name instills fear in the hearts of people. The primary figure behind the Valentine's Day massacre, where the strongest mafia men in America were assassinated. The Godfather who embarrassed the federal government in front of the world. Capone. His real name is Alphonse Gabriel Capone. He was born in the year 1899 in the Brooklyn neighborhood of New York to a family of Italian immigrant origins. His parents, who came to the United States seeking a better future for their children, aimed to provide a decent life for them despite the challenges they faced. His father, Gabriel Capone, worked as a barber while his mother, Teresa, practiced the profession of sewing. Al Capone grew up among 9 siblings in a harsh and dangerous environment where his parents did their utmost to protect and raise him. But the streets of New York held a different fate for him. Like many immigrants of that period, Al Capone's parents worked hard to secure their daily sustenance, respected the law, and made great efforts to integrate into their new community despite the linguistic, cultural, and religious challenges they faced. The neighborhood of Brooklyn, where Alphonse Capone grew up, is considered very poor, with many families living in harsh conditions. The young boy lived from the age of 10 in an environment full of deviation and misery, which greatly affected his personality, as his tendencies towards violence and brutality quickly began to take shape. When he reached the age of 14, he formed his first gang called the Navy Street Gang, named after the neighborhood he lived in. His goal with this gang was to confront the harassment of Italian girls, which was being caused by Irish boys in the area. After proving himself as the leader of his small gang, Al Capone already showed an innate leadership ability. It will accompany him throughout his life. At the same age, he left school after unexpectedly hitting his teacher, which led the institution to impose a disciplinary punishment on him, resulting in the end of his education at an early age, due to his aggressive nature and tendency towards violence. When he reached 19 years of age, Al Capone married an Irish girl named Mary Coughlin. He had met her in a bar, and afterwards the couple had their only child named Albert Francis. At that stage, Al Capone's future was uncertain, as after leaving school at an early age, he had few options other than turning to the streets to secure a livelihood for his family. He was striving hard to engage in the world of crime, as New York City was witnessing a spread of misdemeanors and organized crime. While frequenting New York bars, Al Capone began meeting big names and prominent figures in the mafia world, which gave him the opportunity to take his first steps toward organized crime. A few months later, Capone succeeded in joining a new gang that included a number of famous gangsters, like Johnny Torrio, Frankie Yale, and Lucky Luciano. With these men, Capone began receiving lessons and learning the basics of the world of organized crime, and he started taking his first steps toward fame in New York. His professional rise began when Frankie Yale chose him to work with him in his private establishment, which was a bar and brothel called the Harvard Inn. Al Capone's task was to collect money from customers who were late in payment and intimidate them with force if necessary. In addition to monitoring the flow of money from the prostitutes to avoid any embezzlement. This bar was also known for its bad reputation, being a place full of fights and disputes, with violence and murder being part of daily life there. In this tense atmosphere, Capone participated in many conflicts and emerged victorious, which contributed to building his legend among gangsters. And from here, he got the nickname Scarface that would follow him throughout his life. Over time, as his status in the gang grew, Al Capone became more respected by his peers. In this atmosphere of violence and intimidation, he began working as a waiter at Frankie Yale's bar, where he continued to gain more power and influence. The story behind his nickname, Scarface, which means the face with the scar, began when Capone approached a girl one night and whispered some bad words in her ear. The girl did not like his words and rejected his behavior. Then she went to complain to her brother, who was a gangster named Frank Galluccio. Galluccio was extremely drunk and in a furious rage, so he decided to avenge his sister using a bottle opener, to slaughter Capone. Luckily, he missed his aim, but Capone was deeply wounded on his cheek twice, resulting in a prominent scar extending from his ear to his mouth. Although Capone tried to hide this scar throughout his life, abi kan pinhampadim tanestain di nahan. However, he did not know that it would become an integral part of his strong personality and the reason behind his famous nickname, Scarface, which would follow him throughout his criminal career. After surviving death, fearing for his wife Mary Coughlin, Al Capone decided to distance himself from the world of organized crime, and a strong desire to change the course of his life began to grow within him. His desire to find an honest and respectable job increased, especially to protect his family and secure a better future for them. In a step towards a more stable life, he left Frankie Yale's bar and moved to Baltimore, where he was able to get a job that allowed him to develop his accounting skills. These skills were of great benefit to him later, during the Prohibition era, when he had to manage millions of dollars. Unfortunately, his ordinary life did not last long. On the 14th of November, 1920, his father Gabriel passed away from a heart attack, forcing him to return to Brooklyn. And with it, a return to violence and problems, sinking once again into the world of organized crime. After returning to the world of organized crime, Al Capone decided this time to stay in it forever, gaining a notorious reputation in New York as a dangerous gangster because he used force and violence quickly and without hesitation, even if it meant killing anyone if necessary. One day while working, he killed a prostitute who had hidden money from him. Then, he killed a customer who refused to pay his debt at the bar where he worked. He continued working and became lacking in human warmth with everyone. His fellow gang members began to view his bloody temper negatively, especially Frankie Yale and Lucky Luciano, who decided to send him out of the city for a while to calm things down and avoid attracting the attention of the authorities, who was increasingly pursuing them. During this period, the consumption or production of alcohol was prohibited in the country, which created significant opportunities for organized crime to control the black market for alcohol. In the year 1921, one of the gang leaders in Chicago named Johnny Torrio needed a trustworthy person to help him with his increasing legal problems. Since he had heard about Capone before, he decided to offer him $2,000 to work with him. When Al Capone received the offer, he accepted it without hesitation due to his urgent need for money to catch the first train to Chicago. As soon as he arrived, he began to learn the secrets and mysteries of organized crime in the city, which enabled him to rise quickly and advance smoothly in the world of organized crime. Inside the depths of Chicago, Al Capone had to rely completely on his new boss and mentor, Johnny Torrio. During that period, Torrio was the perfect person to guide Capone and direct him correctly into the higher circles of crime. Thanks to Torrio's instructions, Capone realized the importance of using his mind more than employing physical force. If he wanted to advance in the hierarchy of the gangster world, he started working in low-level brothels and was soon promoted to a bartender in one of the main bars owned by Johnny Torrio. This place was like Frankel's Bar in New York, far from being a quiet place to have drinks, as crime and fighting are also part of the daily routine in this bar. Despite that, Capone was able to prove himself in this violent environment and managed to establish a strong relationship with his boss, Torrio, who increasingly trusted him. Over time, Al Capone began to make huge profits from his illegal activities, especially through alcohol smuggling, prostitution, extortion, and sports betting, which generated a lot of money for the mafia. Everything is going well for Torrio and Capone, who are watching their criminal empire grow and thrive. Brothels and speakeasies in Chicago had never been so widespread before, but in return, a new obstacle emerged for them, especially when William E. Dever took over the position of the newly appointed mayor of Chicago, as Dever was determined to eliminate illegal gambling and prohibited criminal activities. Upon taking office, he launched a strict campaign against illegal bars and establishments. As a result of these new measures, many sites that were a source of income for the gangs were closed. This strong action forced the gangsters to leave Chicago, prompting Capone and Torrio to look for another place to re-establish their empire. They had no choice but to move their operations to the suburbs, specifically to the town of Cicero. Upon their arrival in Cicero, Johnny Torrio, the leader of the gang to which Al Capone belonged, aimed to make this town a new and suitable base for their illegal business operations, which included alcohol smuggling and sports betting, as he sought to rebuild their criminal power in this new area, expand their empire, and gain full control over the city of Cicero and its infrastructure. But to achieve this goal, it was necessary for the Republican Joseph Z. Klinha to win the upcoming elections, as his failure would threaten all the mafia's criminal activities with failure. Thus, Al Capone set out to implement his plan to control politics in Cicero, deciding to influence the election results to support his candidate, and it was necessary to tip the scales in his favor by any means possible. Or to ensure the success of his plan, Al Capone brought two of his brothers, Frank and Ralph Capone, to help manipulate the elections. On the 31st of March, 1924, on Election Day, the gangsters resorted to violence, using their fists and weapons to intimidate voters and force them to vote for Klinha. Voters were forced and taken to the polling stations. where the gangsters made sure that the envelopes contained the name of the candidate Joseph Zaid Kleinhardt. As a result of these actions, the residents of Cicero were deeply shocked by these threats, which forced them to obey the gangsters under the threat of being shot immediately. With the situation worsening, the honest voters felt frustrated by these practices, so they decided to turn to Judge Edmund K. Jarecki for help after being informed of what happened. Judge Edmund K. Jarecki realized the seriousness of the situation and immediately sent 70 plainclothed police officers to the city of Cicero to protect citizens from the gang. As soon as they arrived, the police officers mingled with the crowds, but soon riots broke out in the area. The police officers moved cautiously, disguised among the people. When they got out of their civilian cars, they saw Frank Capone trying to pull a gun from his pocket, thinking they were members of a rival gang preparing to attack them. Frank Capone braced for the worst, but the police officers, who didn't have time to think about the situation, shot him in cold blood immediately. Frank was hit by several consecutive bullets until the gun was emptied. His death was indescribably brutal, and the bullets quickly brought him down, making his death immediate. Chaos continued to sweep Cicero. After this tragic incident, the ballot boxes remained open until they were closed. But despite this tragedy for Capone, his efforts were not in vain, as Joseph Z. Klein was re-elected as their preferred candidate, allowing Capone and Torrio to continue expanding their criminal empire. But their victory came with a bitter taste due to Capone's loss of his brother in the battle, which deeply affected him and made it difficult for him to recover from this profound emotional loss. Less than a month after the turbulent Cicero elections, Johnny Torrio and Al Capone wasted no time in expanding their criminal empire. They started by launching a new casino, which brought them nearly $1.5 million in the first few years, a huge amount at that time. The gang also toured more than 150 gambling houses in Cicero, where alcohol was freely served despite prohibition laws. This exceptional exploitation contributed to the flourishing of their illegal alcohol trade. However, the Italian-American gang was not the only one seeking to dominate the liquor market. There was also an Irish gang that had been in the area before them, aiming to get its share of the profits and competing with them for control in the alcohol trade. And due to the intense competition, the Italian and Irish gangs quickly clashed, and the competition between them became bloody as both sides. They are struggling to monopolize the alcohol trade. The Irish gang, led by Dino Bagnon, attacked the Italians who were controlling a large part of the alcohol trade in the area at that time. Their goal was clear: to eliminate Johnny Torrio, the head of the Italian gang, at any cost. After a long bloody struggle, the gang decided to launch a raid to assassinate him in an attempt to assert their control over the alcohol trade. But luck was not on the side of the Irish gang, as their attempt to assassinate Johnny Torrio failed, giving him the opportunity to retaliate and take revenge. And on November 10th, 1924, 5 months after the failed attack, Torrio's men carried out an assassination targeting Dean O'Banion, the leader of the Irish gang, inside his flower shop. O'Banion received 2 bullets in his chest and 2 in his neck, falling dead instantly. 3 of Torrio's men participated in carrying out the crime: Frankie Yale, John Scalise, and Albert Anselmi. Despite their success in eliminating one of their main rivals, this was not the final chapter in the conflict, as the Irish gang did not surrender. Heidi Weiss and Bugs Moran returned to avenge their leader's death, continuing the war between the two gangs. This is exactly what happened in January of the year 1925, when the Irish gang devised a new plan to assassinate Johnny Torrio. This time, they almost succeeded. In a critical moment, Torrio miraculously survived and was on the verge of death. After this incident, Torrio expressed his dissatisfaction with the chaos in Chicago and announced his retirement from the world of crime. With this decision, he handed over the reins to Al Capone, who became the new leader. 4. Criminal operations. Although everyone expected a swift retaliation, Al Capone did not immediately respond to the assassination attempt on Torrio, as he was busy with another gang war against the Jennas, a dangerous Sicilian mafia that posed a significant threat to him. However, Al Capone could not ignore the Irish gangs that were determined to avenge the death of Dean O'Banion. Therefore, Scarface decided to respond to their attacks and plan to eliminate them completely. And that's exactly what happened. On the 11th of October, 1926, Al Capone prepared and assembled a team of 5 professional killers to carry out one of the most dangerous assassinations in the world of organized crime. Among them were Frank Nitti, Anthony Accardo, Frank Diamond, Albert Anselmi, and John Scalise. All of them were tasked with eliminating Jaime Weiss. Capone's men tracked Weiss's movements for a week, waiting for the perfect moment to execute their plan. Finally, when the right opportunity arose, as Weiss was leaving with 3 of his bodyguards from their store, Capone's men mercilessly killed him. Weiss fell to the ground, thus ending the career of one of Capone's most feared adversaries. There was nothing left for him but to get rid of Bugs Moran, his last rival in the alcohol trade in Chicago. In April 1927, William Thomason was re-elected as the mayor of Chicago, the perfect ally for Al Capone and his family. After 4 years in exile, Al Capone and his gang members managed to return to Chicago and to their previous headquarters. The new mayor of the city also found himself in a position that allowed for an increase in criminal activities, as he adopted a policy of turning a blind eye to organized crime during his term, and as a result, the gangs continued to expand their influence with little to no intervention from the police. On the other hand, Bugs Moran still posed the biggest challenge to Al Capone for complete control of the alcohol market in Chicago. As the last competitor to Capone in the alcohol smuggling trade, the two men entered into a constant struggle and an unprecedented war. Mutual killing spread everywhere, causing terror in the streets of Chicago. It quickly became clear that this war would only end with the victory of one side. To end this conflict, Al Capone decided to devise a bold plan to eliminate Bugs Moran once and for all. On February 14, 1929, which coincides with Valentine's Day, one of the largest mass eliminations in the history of organized crime in Chicago was carried out, later known as the Valentine's Day Massacre. While spending his vacation at his villa in Florida, Capone ordered his men to go to one of Bugs Moran's liquor warehouses, disguised as police officers. The killers stormed the place and ordered the 7 people in the building to line up against the wall. The victims showed no resistance, confident that it was just a routine raid that could be settled with a bribe, as usual. But they were mistaken. Without mercy, Capone's men unleashed a hail of bullets, turning Moran's warehouse into a horrifying massacre site. None of them survived, as all 7 were killed instantly. However, the biggest shock came during the identification of the bodies, as Capone's men discovered that Bugs Moran was not among the victims. He had managed to escape when he saw the police approaching the warehouse. Despite Bugs Moran surviving that bloody incident on Valentine's Day, the effects of the massacre were profound. The horrific attack caused him severe psychological trauma, affecting his desire to continue the fight. As a result, Moran gradually distanced himself from his major conflicts with Capone's gang, and withdrew from the smuggling and robbery operations that had been earning him a fortune. Over time, Moran began engaging in smaller crimes, and his influence in the criminal world became limited. He no longer enjoyed the same protection from the police as before, becoming more susceptible to arrests and pursuits. His end in prison was inevitable, as he was arrested in the late 1940s for another bank robbery, and he died in 1957 while serving his sentence. And thus his career ended. With this, Capone finally got rid of all his rivals and managed to gain complete control over organized crime in Chicago. And on the 19th of May, 1929, the first summit to combat organized crime in the United States was held, where top mafia leaders gathered in Atlantic City to discuss the future of their criminal activities. Al Capone would not miss this event, as he made sure to attend in person to monitor the situation and ensure that no conspiracies were being plotted against him behind his back. He was accompanied at this conference by several prominent figures in the world of crime, such as Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, Albert Anastasia, and Willie Moretti. The main goal of this meeting was to ease tensions between different mafia families to avoid bloody conflict that could cause significant harm to their operations. But Capone did not receive a positive reception at this meeting, and in particular, he faced severe criticism for the media spotlight on him since the infamous Valentine's Day massacre. Some of the mafia leaders began to believe that the media attention on him might harm their interests, so they considered him to have become a burden on organized crime. Thus, Al Capone was advised to stay away for a while and hide temporarily to avoid further escalation and calm the situation. So he resorted to an unexpected but extremely drastic solution. Just 16 hours after leaving the Atlantic City conference, he made a secret agreement with the Philadelphia police to arrange his arrest on a weapons possession charge. From his point of view, this was the best option to disappear from the eyes of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which had started monitoring him closely with increasing interest. Consequently, he was sentenced to 1 year in prison, which is a relatively light sentence. This was due to bribery and his many lawyers. During his absence, Al Capone entrusted the management of operations to his older brother Ralph, who was one of his closest aides and had previously helped him control the Cicero area. After serving his sentence, he could not return to his business in exactly the same way, as the Valentine's Day massacre had changed his image forever. and made him the focus of public attention, who now see him not only as a gang leader but as a symbol of absolute violence in America. Afterwards, Capone will try hard to improve his public image, attempting to do so by appearing in various media where he is shown engaging in his favorite hobbies. In fact, the Chicago Godfather was a big sports enthusiast. He loved attending major sporting events, such as boxing matches, baseball games, horse races, and dog races. He started attending sports events with politicians who did not hesitate to appear with him during that period. Capone also allocated part of his free time was spent attending theater shows and opera, in addition to engaging in other hobbies like listening to jazz music, playing poker, and swimming. But what he truly excelled at was promoting himself in front of the media. This unprecedented appearance of the Capone gang piqued the interest of journalists who began to shape the legend of Capone, the wonderful person. Nevertheless, his reputation began to suffer again due to the St. Valentine's Day massacre, making his public image vulnerable to attack once more. To overcome this negative image, Capone this time chose to appear as a benefactor, serving the people by helping and rescuing the poor. Despite his constant concern about his public image and the government's increasing interest in eliminating organized crime in Chicago, Capone made every effort to improve his situation. During that period, his empire was achieving annual sales of $120 million, equivalent to $1.5 billion today. Money was no longer an urgent need for him. So Capone began trying to do everything to restore his great reputation. And he partially achieved this goal through his donations aimed at helping the poor. This approach was particularly evident during the Great Depression in 1929, when he opened a popular restaurant to assist those in need. For him, it is a way to get closer to the people and the common class. His goal above all is to establish the image of Robin Hood in people's minds, the person who steals from the rich to redistribute to the poor. Through these charitable acts, Capone was able to gain some media attention that he desperately needed, although it did not last long, as legal troubles soon caught up with him. After several months, new evidence emerged in the St. Valentine's Day massacre case, which shocked public opinion, especially with the way Al Capone's men carried out the killings against Bugs Moran's gang with unparalleled cold-bloodedness. This incident, which was widely covered by the newspapers, sparked great anger and resentment among Americans, who no longer viewed the character of Scarface in the same way. After that, it became clear that public appearances or humanitarian acts could not change this reality. Al Capone reached the point of no return as the government made its decision. It wants to bring down Capone, who has become public enemy number one. However, toppling the Godfather of Chicago was not an easy task, because at the height of his rule, Capone had such great influence that the law itself was powerless to confront him. Frankly, at that time, Capone's army was stronger than the combined forces of the Chicago police and county authorities, and it is also impossible to bring him to justice for the serious crimes attributed to him, such as alcohol smuggling, extortion, pimping, gambling, and murder. At that time, all of America was convinced that Capone was a criminal, but no one could prove it. Even Eliot Ness, the famous Prohibition agent at that time,
could not find enough evidence to convict Al Capone. Faced with this reality, the government and the Federal Bureau of Investigation had no other choice. Another solution had to be sought. Despite all the government's attempts to bring down Capone, they saw that the best way to achieve this was to convict him of tax evasion. In fact, the public enemy number one was not paying taxes at all, making it a legitimate charge that the authorities could use against him. Even though Al Capone's wealth amounted to millions of dollars, no tax return was filed in his name. After that, the government decided to look for a legal loophole and exploit it immediately. A team of Treasury Department agents was tasked with gathering evidence that could lead them to capture the Capone gang. In 1931, an accountant named Frank J. Wilson discovered conclusive evidence of undeclared income from the Godfather's earnings. This income was found in gambling records, where Capone's name appeared listed. Things began to come to an end for Capone, and legal proceedings were not far off. On the 5th of June, 1931, he was arrested and charged with tax evasion. Then on the 6th of October, 1931, his trial began in the federal court in Chicago. The trial gained an international dimension as media from all over the world followed it. Something unprecedented at that time. The trial represented the entire United States against one gangster. In this trial, Capone was not very worried, as he believed he could avoid a prison sentence that might not exceed 2 years if he pleaded guilty before the judges. But as soon as the jury was selected, Capone, as usual, tried to bribe or threaten them. However, things did not go as he expected, as the jurors were replaced at the last moment. From that moment, the trial began to take a completely different course. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury issued its verdict, convicting Al Capone of tax evasion. Then, 6 days later, the final sentence was issued. The gangster was sentenced to 11 years in prison. This sentence was considered excessively harsh at the time, as tax evasion cases rarely exceeded 2 years. But in the end, prison became his next destination. Finally, he was transferred to Cook County Jail. His stay there was relatively comfortable and enjoyable, and his friends and political supporters were able to visit him at any time. In those days, things were going well for Scarface, who was spending quiet days in prison. But things did not go as expected, as the illness began to destroy his mental health. He was diagnosed by doctors with syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease which he likely contracted during a sexual encounter with a prostitute in his youth. This disease will make him lose a lot, and the most important thing he will lose is control over his criminal empire. Over time, his colleagues and followers began to distance themselves from him or ignore him. After that, the situation worsened for him when he was transferred to Atlanta prison, a stricter prison that does not allow any form of corruption. The days of comfort he enjoyed in his previous cell have ended. At the age of 33, his health continued to deteriorate as syphilis reached its 3rd stage, gradually leading to dementia. But his nightmare was not over yet. In August 1934, Capone was transferred to Alcatraz Federal Prison, located on an island near San Francisco. The government established this prison to detain the most dangerous criminals in the country. In Alcatraz, visits were limited to once a month, and physical contact with visitors was completely prohibited. Prisoners were also not allowed to have radios, newspapers, or any reading materials. Additionally, work inside the prison was considered a privilege, not a right, while sentenced prisoners were held in small cells and were not allowed to communicate with each other. What made matters worse was that there was no way out of this prison, leaving Capone with no choice but to complete his sentence in this extremely strict place. But the illness quickly caused his condition to deteriorate faster than expected. As his health worsened, doctors had to transfer him to the hospital. Ultimately, the severe decline in his health led to his permanent departure from Alcatraz prison, as he was moved to his family outside the prison. Capone spent his final years in his villa in Florida, surrounded by family members. During that time, Capone became just a shadow of his former self, as his mood resembled that of a 12-year-old child, causing him to constantly confuse fantasy with reality.
On January 25, 1947, Alphonse Gabriel Capone died. Emma known as Scarface, following a heart attack at the age of 48. And you, dear viewer, share your opinion with us in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to our channel to receive all the latest updates.